Hello everyone. This video will be a two-part tutorial that'll be going over the fundamental mechanics needed to do virtually every known trick in the teapot. Part 1 will focus on explaining how to do these techniques, while Part 2, in a separate video, will attempt to explain why these techniques function the way that they do, and how to apply these theories to expand upon the foundational techniques for use in more advanced teapot builds. With that being said though, I'm going to have a list of the general topics that'll be covered in this video up on the screen, and there will be timestamps in the description. So if you're looking for a specific trick or mechanic, you can use that to skip straight to it. First and foremost, the bread and butter of almost any teapot build, clipping. Clipping an object into another object is quite easy. All that you need to do is take the object that you want to clip and rapidly move it in and out of another object so that the border around it flashes between blue and red. Once it's no longer flashing red, like that, then you know that it should be good to clip into other objects. Another method of doing this uses the border of the map. Outside of the border of the map is out of bounds, so all objects will be red. But rapidly moving an object in and out of bounds will achieve the same effect as rapidly moving it in and out of another object. Despite saying that you need to move the object rapidly, you actually don't need to move it that quickly. So players who use a controller don't necessarily have to worry about ruining their control sticks. Simple, light movement back and forth will achieve the exact same effect. Additionally, you can rapidly rotate an object with the rotate button on controllers and achieve the same effect so long as the object has one angle that is blue and another angle that is red. Once both angles turn blue, it's completely clippable. There are some objects that can't be clipped using these methods, however. These objects tend to include interactable objects, companions, and animals. So to clip these objects, we'll have to resort to an older clipping method known as cliff clipping. Cliff clipping is fairly simple. All that you really need to do is take the object that you want to clip, put it onto a cliff, then select the cliff, and move the cliff into whatever object you want to clip the original object on the cliff into. This allows you to clip even objects that are in those special categories like companions and animals into other things. Additionally, objects like floating rocks can be used to position characters into tight spaces where larger cliffs might be more difficult to use. In these particular situations, though, you will have to clip the rock into the object using previous clipping methods, but the same general functions apply here when it comes to placing companions. Like clipping, there are a few ways to float objects in the air, and some ways are better than others depending on the situation. Regular floating is pretty straightforward. First, you position the object where you want it. You may need to use a floating rock or a cliff to do that, and that may require you to clip the rock or cliff into something else first. Once the object is in position, then you select it. If the object immediately turns red, that means that you likely need to clip it first for it to be positioned there. After doing that, you'll need to angle your camera so that you can see beneath the object. From that angle, you'll click on the object again. If the object flashes red and then blue, then it's successfully floating. Sometimes, however, getting the camera into the correct position to see beneath the object isn't feasible. Thankfully, there is another way to do floating, the snowman method. If you don't have the snowman object from the event in the 2.3 update, sadly you won't be able to use this method as it currently is the only object known to interact with other things in this way. It's actually just the snowman's head that allows this. So if Mario releases any future objects that have heads as separate parts, then they'll likely work this way as well. When you place the snowman into the teapot, and I recommend doing that on a small floating rock, you'll have to exit out of the editor and go place the head on the snowman. Again, the head is what allows this method to work. The first few steps of the snowman method are pretty similar to the normal method of floating. Get the object you want, position it where you want it, flip the rock or cliff that's carrying it if needed, and confirm. Now, from here, you'll want to make sure that the snowman's head is between your camera and the bottom edge of the object that you want to float. Once you do that, select the object and clip it if you need to, and then line up the camera again so the snowman's head is slightly in the way. From here, you'll click on the object that you want to float by clicking through the snowman's head. If the object flashes red then blue, it's floating. If not, then you might need to readjust the angle of the camera or the snowman. This method makes it a lot easier to float objects in very densely populated builds, or in certain teapot realms like Emerald Peaks, where the camera doesn't always go low enough to get beneath objects at certain heights. This next method of floating, called edge floating, is often used for interior builds, since the other methods are either impossible for interiors, like the snowman method, or sometimes difficult to set up. With edge floating, you'll need to first make sure that the object you want to float can naturally go over other objects. For interiors, these are usually in the ornament category. After this, you'll want to clip the object you plan to float. Afterwards, you'll take the object and drag it to the edge of the furniture you want to float it on. At the edge, you should feel it snag a bit. Once you feel that snag, stop dragging. The object should turn blue and be floatable in that position. Syncing is a skill that, with the introduction of making custom sets, has a lot of nuances to it. I'm going to go over the basic mechanics of syncing here, and save the more complicated mechanics for a later section in the video. The normal method of syncing requires 4 main components. First, the objects you want to sync. Second, a carrier platform with an adjustable height to hold the objects, like a floating rock or platform. Third, a height platform to sync the carrier platform beneath and indicate what ground level will be. It's also recommended that this object have an adjustable height, but it isn't necessarily needed. And fourth, an anchor that will always be on ground level, so that you can adjust the position of the objects along the X and Y axes. Once you have all of these, the first step will be to put the objects you want to sync onto your carrier platform. Then you'll go to Create a Set, and add your anchor object and your carrier platform to the set. You don't need to add the objects themselves to the set. Make sure that the set is compact enough to fit entirely onto the height platform, and then place it onto the height platform. The top of the height platform acts as an indicator for what ground level is, so grab the carrier object and adjust its height so that it sinks beneath the top of the height platform, then confirm. From here, select the anchor and click Edit Set to move the entire set back onto the ground. You'll see that the carrier platform and the objects that you wanted to sync are now both beneath the ground, just like how they were beneath the height platform before. You can only use the anchor object to adjust the position of the other objects in the set. If you try to adjust the other objects directly, they'll pop back up above ground, so make sure you're fine with where everything is before you take away the anchor object. Another common and much easier use of syncing is the stone stairs syncing. With this technique, you'll take these floatable rocks, group them into a set, align them to make a staircase, and then sink the bottom rock into the ground so that the characters can easily climb up it. The first step is to group all of the rocks needed into a set. Once that's done, move the set onto a height platform. Take the first rock of the staircase and sink it beneath the height platform until only a small section of it is sticking out. Then align the rest of the rocks in a similar fashion to create the steps of the staircase. Once you're done, you can select the entire set and drag it back to the ground, where you'll see that it is successfully beneath the ground and easy to climb up. There are a lot of ways to make staircases by sinking and floating, but none of them are quite as fascinating as this method that actually generates the stairs automatically. It can make straight staircases and spiral staircases easily. For this method, any stackable objects that can all be moved by selecting the bottom of the stack will work, but these objects here tend to have the best appearance and results. To start this, you're going to need 2 height platforms that are large enough to hold these objects. On one of the platforms, place a single one of these bricks. On the other platform, we're going to stack a few of the same bricks on top of each other. For this, it's best to use the snap to grid feature to make sure that the positioning is exact. You can have up to as many as it takes to reach the height ceiling in a stack. Once you have your stack, turn off the snap to grid feature. Go over to the other height platform and move the bricks towards the edge of the platform slowly. You should see the bricks start to sink a little into the platform without completely falling off of it. You want them to be slightly sunken into the platform for this. Then you take the height platform and move it so that the bricks on the right are clipping into the bricks on the left with a small amount protruding at the end. That protrusion will actually define how pronounced each individual step is, so you can have long or short steps depending on how much overhang there is. But be sure that the side edges are aligned as much as possible. Precision is needed here, else it will offset the angle of the stairs. From here, you'll take the platform and slightly raise it. I'd recommend not going higher than 0.5 from where you start. This defines how steep the steps are, and anything past 0.5 can make characters climb the stairs awkwardly. Once you do this, it's time to move back to the stack. Click Create Set, and from the top, start selecting each of the bricks in the set. You only want the bricks from the stack, not the bricks clipping into the stack. Also, do not confirm the set. Once you have all of the stacks selected, move it on top of the bricks that are clipping into the stack. Align them as accurately as possible. Once they're aligned, click Cancel, and the bricks should all collapse into a set of stairs. The process for making spiral stairs is nigh identical. You go through the same steps all the way up until the end, but this time, before canceling the set, rotate the stack slightly. The exact angle isn't a science here, but you don't want to rotate it too much, else you'll end up with more of a star shape than a spiraling staircase. Once you do the rotation, then click Cancel, the stairs will be created. This is the more complicated mechanic for sinking that I mentioned earlier in the video. I saved this method for last because it is likely the most recently discovered mechanic, and it draws upon everything we've talked about hitherto this point. Additionally, in part 2, I'll discuss some ways to expand upon this method for more advanced builds. This technique differs from both normal sinking and floating because those techniques tend to be rather static and permanent. Once you float or sink an object, adjusting its height requires you to redo the entire process. With this technique, you can adjust the position of the objects on the X, Y, and Z axes without having to redo the entire process. This is what makes it dynamic. You can dynamically change the position on the fly. To do this, you will need 2 height platforms. Put all of the objects you want to sink or float onto one of the height platforms. Then click on Create a Set, and select all of the objects on the height platform and the height platform itself. However, like with making automatic staircases, we aren't going to confirm the set. Instead, we're going to use the same method as we did with the automatic staircases for this. It is important to note that in more complex combinations of objects for this technique, the order of the selection for making the set will affect whether or not this works. Like with making the automated staircases, you will need to select the objects from top to bottom in order of height. So the objects on the bottom, in this case the height platform, need to be selected last for this to work correctly. If you do it from the bottom up, nothing will happen. And if you have a stack and miss some in the middle, only the top few objects will be displaced and included in the end result. So, take the selection, move it onto the other height platform, and then click Cancel. The location of the objects relative to the height platform they were on will depend on how far you moved the entire set to get onto the second height platform. However, when you select the height platform that had the objects placed on it, you'll find that if you move it, whether vertically or horizontally, the objects that were on it will also move in the same way. This allows you to sink or float things on the fly. There are two restrictions with this method, however. Currently, if you move the objects themselves around and not the platform controlling them, you will break the connection. Additionally, if you take away the platform, the objects will be removed. The last point can be fixed by using the snowman method to float the objects, whether they be underground or flying. Then you can remove the platform, and the objects will still remain. This, however, has its own restrictions, those being that the objects in question can't be clipping into anything. If they are clipping, you won't be able to use this method to remove the platform. Until a technique comes along that allows us to clip objects without moving them, this is a restriction we just have to deal with. By using and combining these fundamental mechanics, you should be able to do any teapot trick that is currently known. In Part 2, I'll be discussing some theories as to why these teapot mechanics work the way that they do, while also offering some practical uses for said theories that'll help expand on some of the basic foundations covered in this video, so be sure to check it out. A lot of work and research went into making this, so if this video helped in any way, or if you have questions, feel free to leave a comment, and consider sharing the video with others who also may be interested in Genshin's teapot building.